They say love makes you blind. In my case, it made me stupid. My name's Mike, 35, a self-proclaimed tech nerd who somehow got engaged to the girl of my dreams, Erin. She was out of my league, or at least I thought so. She was charming, ambitious, and had a smile that could light up a stadium. I used to joke that I must have saved a busload of orphans in a past life to end up with someone like her. We met 3 years ago at a mutual friend's party. She caught my eye immediately, not just because she was gorgeous, but because she actually seemed interested in me. Me, awkward Mike, whose idea of flirting was offering to fix your Wi-Fi. But Erin didn't just laugh at my dumb jokes. She actually seemed to get me. It didn't take long before we were inseparable. Fast forward to 6 months ago, when I got down on one knee and asked her to marry me. She said yes, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I'd won. But life, as I was about to find out, has a cruel sense of humor. It started innocently enough, or at least I thought it did. Erin had a sales job that required frequent travel. Long hours, business trips, and late-night calls were all part of the package. I'd always trusted her, so when she mentioned a 5-day trip to Phoenix for a sales conference, I didn't bat an eye. But the night before she left, something felt off. She was glued to her phone, laughing at messages she wouldn't let me see. When I asked who she was texting, she brushed me off with a vague, just work stuff. Work stuff doesn't usually make you giggle like a teenager. I wasn't proud of what I did next. While she slept, I took her phone. I'm a software developer. Digging through digital footprints is practically my day job. But I didn't find anything outright incriminating, just deleted messages and one Snapchat account I didn't recognize. Something about it gnawed at me, though, like a splinter in my brain. So I did what any sane, rational fiancé would do. I installed spyware on her phone. The next morning, I kissed her goodbye, told her to have a safe trip. Yeah, I know, trust issues much? But something about the way she hugged me felt hollow, like she was already somewhere else. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. The messages between Erin and her so-called colleague started popping up almost immediately after her plane landed. His name was Brad. Married. 3 kids. Classic midlife crisis material. The texts weren't just inappropriate, they were a gut punch. Erin, can't wait to see you tonight. Brad, counting down the minutes, babe. Babe. Really? I wasn't sure whether to laugh or vomit. Spoiler, I did both. As I read through their texts, the timeline of their affair became painfully clear. 2 months before I proposed, Erin and Brad had started hooking up. The messages painted a picture of hotel rooms, stolen weekends, and enough sexual innuendo to make a nun faint. The cherry on top. Brad's wife was 7 months pregnant. I wanted to scream, punch a wall, or crawl into a hole and disappear. Instead, I called my best friend, Jack. Jack's been my ride or die since we were 12. He's the kind of guy who would throw hands for you, no questions asked. When I told him what I'd found, he didn't even hesitate. We're burning it all down, he said. I wasn't sure what burning it all down entailed, but Jack had this way of making you feel like everything would be okay, even when it wasn't. That night, we hatched a plan. If Erin wanted to play with fire, I was more than happy to hand her a flamethrower. Jack didn't waste any time. First thing we need is leverage, he said, cracking open a beer at my kitchen counter. If you're gonna light this up, you better make sure it burns the right people. We spent the next few days building a case that would make a private investigator jealous. My spyware had already captured screenshots of Erin and Brad's texts, but I wanted more, something undeniable, something even Erin couldn't worm her way out of. The spyware was a goldmine. I intercepted messages, saw calendar invites for business dinners, and even snagged a picture she sent Brad, her in my hoodie captioned, "Wish you were here." I swear I almost bit through my tongue. That hoodie? It was part of our story. I'd given it to her during our first camping trip when she got cold. Now it was her sexy accessory for some guy who probably wore cargo shorts unironically. By midweek, Jack suggested we go full throttle. Let's blow this up in front of her parents, he said, eyes gleaming with mischief. I hesitated. Erin's parents, Bill and Margaret, had been nothing but kind to me. They treated me like a son, always inviting me over for dinners and family events. They didn't deserve to be blindsided. Jack, of course, didn't share my sentiment. Mike, this isn't just about Erin. It's about you. You've been bending over backwards for everyone else while she's out playing house with discount Ryan Reynolds. He wasn't wrong. So, against my better judgment, we planned the confrontation at her parents' place. The day of the confrontation was surreal. Erin returned from her trip looking radiant, happy, even. I couldn't decide if I wanted to cry or laugh at the audacity. She kissed me hello, but I couldn't bring myself to kiss her back. "What's wrong?" she asked, frowning. "Nothing," I lied. "Big surprise tonight at your parents' place though. Don't be late." Her eyes lit up. "What kind of surprise?" "Oh, you'll see," I said, plastering on the most saccharine smile I could muster. Jack almost choked trying to hold in a laugh. That evening, the four of us sat in Bill and Margaret's cozy living room, the smell of lasagna wafting through the air. Erin's parents were the picture of warmth, chatting about family updates and weekend plans. Erin sat beside me, her hand on my knee, completely unaware of the bomb ticking beneath the surface. "So Mike," Margaret said, beaming, "what's this big surprise?" Jack leaned forward, grin wider than the Grand Canyon. "Mike's got some news to share. Big stuff." My heart was pounding, but I kept my voice calm. I started with gratitude, thanking Bill and Margaret for welcoming me into their family, for treating me like one of their own. Then, I pivoted. "But," I said, my tone turning icy, "there's something I need to address. Something Erin hasn't been honest about." Erin's smile faltered. "Mike, what are you talking about?" I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. The first image appeared on their TV, a screenshot of Erin's texts with Brad. "Brad, can't wait to see you tonight." Erin, counting down the minutes, "Babe." Bill's face turned pale. Margaret gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. Erin shot to her feet, her voice trembling. "Mike, stop, this isn't the place." "Oh, I think it's exactly the place," I said, scrolling to the next screenshot. This one showed her standing in a hotel room, wearing my hoodie, with Brad's name visible in the chat bubble below. "Who the hell is Brad?" Bill demanded, his voice shaking with anger. Erin stammered, her words a jumbled mess of excuses. "It's not what it looks like, it's just work." "Mike, I can explain." "Explain this," I snapped, hitting play on an audio clip I'd recorded from her phone. It was Erin and Brad in a hotel room, whispering sweet nothings. "Erin, maybe we could just leave all this behind. Start fresh, just us." "Brad, you know I'd do it in a heartbeat, babe. You're my everything." The room fell into a deafening silence. Bill looked like he was about to explode, while Margaret stared at Erin, tears streaming down her face. "You've been cheating?" Margaret's voice cracked. Erin turned to me, desperate. "Mike, please, let's talk about this, privately." "Privately?" I scoffed. "You didn't care about private when you were sneaking around with Brad, did you?" I stood up, pulling a small key from my pocket. "This," I said, tossing it onto the coffee table, "is for the storage unit where all your stuff is now. Congratulations, Erin, you're single." She broke down, sobbing, but I didn't care. Jack and I walked out without another word. The sound of Margaret's crying and Bill's shouting followed us all the way to the driveway. Jack was riding high after our little performance at Erin's parents' place. "Man," he said as we drove away, "if you ever need a career change, you could make a killing as a professional heartbreaker." I managed a weak chuckle, but my mind was already on the next phase. Erin wasn't the only one who deserved a dose of karma. Brad, the smug middle-aged family man with 3 kids and a pregnant wife, wasn't walking away from this unscathed. "You still have that flash drive?" Jack asked. I reached into my pocket and held it up. It contained everything: the texts, the photos, the audio recordings. Enough to turn Brad's perfect suburban life into a dumpster fire. Brad's wife, Lisa, was easy to find. A quick Facebook search led me to her profile, where she proudly shared pictures of their kids, her growing baby bump, and heartfelt posts about how much she loved her husband. The irony was almost too much to stomach. The next day, I drove to their house. Jack insisted on coming along, for backup, though I had no idea what kind of backup he thought I'd need. Lisa answered the door, her expression soft and welcoming. "Hi, can I help you?" "Yeah," I said, holding out the flash drive. "You're gonna want to see this." Her confusion turned to horror as I explained everything. I didn't sugarcoat it, I laid out the affair in brutal detail. She tried to interrupt, asking who I was and why I'd come, but I powered through. "This," I said, gesturing to the flash drive, "is all the proof you'll need. I'm sorry to be the one to tell you, but your husband's been screwing my fiancée for months." Lisa's face crumpled, and for a second, I felt like a monster. But then Brad appeared in the hallway, his face draining of color when he saw me. "What the hell is going on?" he barked, his voice laced with panic. Lisa turned to him, her voice rising. "Why don't you tell me, Brad? Why don't you explain why this man is here telling me about your little side piece?" Brad stammered, trying to deny it, but Lisa wasn't having it. She shoved the flash drive at him, her hands trembling. "Pack a bag. Now." When Brad didn't move, Jack stepped forward, his presence like a wall of barely contained fury. "You heard her," Jack growled, his voice low and dangerous. "Get out." Brad tried to argue, but Jack wasn't in the mood. "Move or I move you." Brad finally slinked off to pack, leaving Lisa sobbing in the doorway. Jack stayed behind to comfort her while I stepped outside, my chest heavy with a mix of vindication and guilt. That night, Lisa called. She thanked me for telling her the truth and confirmed that she'd filed for divorce. She also mentioned that she'd reported Brad and Aaron to HR at their company, attaching the evidence I'd provided. By the next morning, they were both fired. Aaron showed up at my door 2 days later, looking like a shadow of the woman I'd once loved. Her hair was unkempt, her eyes bloodshot. "Mike, please," she begged, tears streaming down her face. I ended it with Brad. "I've lost my job, my family's furious. I'm sorry. I'll do anything to fix this." I stared at her, feeling nothing. "Fix what, Aaron? Us? There is no us." She started to sob harder, but I didn't waver. "You broke it, Aaron. You don't get to decide how this ends." I shut the door in her face, the sound of her crying echoing down the hallway. Later that evening, Jack came over with beer and pizza. "To freedom," he said, raising his bottle. "To freedom," I replied, clinking mine against his. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. Closure doesn't come in a neat package. It's messy, slow, and sometimes, it hits you when you least expect it. For me, closure began when I decided to stop giving Aaron real estate in my mind. She tried, to claw her way back in. She sent me endless texts, emails, even handwritten letters. She came to my apartment multiple times, talking through the door for hours. Each time, I ignored her. Eventually, she dragged her parents into it. One evening, her dad, Bill, showed up at my door. I hesitated, but let him speak. "I just wanted to apologize on behalf of my family," he said, holding a six-pack of my favorite beer. "Erin's been a mess, but that's her problem now. I wanted to make sure you're okay." We ended up walking around the block, sipping beers and talking. He confessed that Erin had always been a bit spoiled, that they'd enabled her bad behavior for too long. "Maybe this is what she needs to finally grow up," he said with a shrug. "Doesn't mean you owe her anything, though." That was the first time I felt genuinely lighter. I wasn't just the guy Erin cheated on, I was the guy who walked away and stayed away. The real turning point came a few weeks later. Erin showed up one last time, begging me to meet her in person. Against my better judgment, I agreed, but only under the condition that we meet in a public park. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting on a bench and crying. Her tears didn't move me the way they used to. They just felt tired. She tried small talk at first, but I wasn't interested. "Say what you came to say," I told her, cutting her off. She launched into an apology, full of cliches about regret and how she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. "I forgave you weeks ago," I said flatly. Her eyes widened. "You did?" "Yeah," I replied. "But not for you. For me. Carrying all that anger and hate? It's exhausting. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. We're done, Erin." Her sobs turned into wails, but I didn't stay to listen. I called her dad, told him to come pick her up, and walked away without looking back. That night, I made a decision. I drove to a local animal shelter and adopted a kitten, a scrappy little tabby with a crooked tail. I named him Rex. When Jack saw him, he smirked. Finally grew a shiny spine, huh? Makes sense you'd name the cat after a king. Rex quickly became a symbol of my fresh start. He didn't care about the mess of my life. He just wanted food, scratches, and a warm lap to curl up on. In a weird way, he reminded me that life can be simple if you let it. In the months that followed, I rebuilt myself piece by piece. I poured myself into work, reconnecting with the parts of my life I'd neglected during my relationship with Erin. Jack and I started hanging out more, playing video games and cracking jokes like we were teenagers again. Every now and then, I'd hear whispers about Erin and Brad. Their lives had fallen apart, Erin was still unemployed, and Brad's ex-wife had moved out of state with their kids. But I didn't dwell on it. Their misery wasn't my problem. One day, Jack asked if I regretted how I handled everything. Not a chance, I said, scratching Rex behind the ears. I stood up for myself, and I walked away with my dignity intact. That's more than they can say. Jack raised his beer. To standing tall. To never settling for less, I replied. As I clinked my bottle against his, I realized I wasn't just moving on, I was thriving. A year later, I met someone new. Her name was Claire, and she was nothing like Erin. She was down-to-earth, kind, and honest in a way that made me believe in people again. When I told her about Erin, she didn't pity me or treat me like damaged goods. She just smiled and said, "Well, it sounds like you've got a great story to tell at parties." Rex, of course, approved immediately. In the end, life didn't give me the fairy tale I thought I wanted. It gave me something better, a second chance to build the life I deserved. And for that, I'll always be grateful.